Hey, Laura. All right. So, first question for you is, could you share a memorable success story from your journey of being an entrepreneur?
Yes. I think getting my own studio space would be the moment because having a space that was just mine, not necessarily shared with other photographers, not necessarily a day rental where you have to load in and tear down all within 8 hours, which can sometimes be quite stressful, but my own brick and mortar space. Um, that just felt like a big watershed moment for myself because all of a sudden I had my own four walls that I could work in 365 days a year if I wanted to. And I was able to control the ambiance and set the tone of the space and have a strong say over how it runs and functions so that I could then welcome clients into an experience that felt vibrant and more relaxed for their projects. But the real win of this was more so than getting the keys, was overcoming the anxiety before picking up the keys. Because now this was very, like many, many years ago now, but I had worked with a wonderful realtor. I had gone and looked at the spaces, sent the references in, done all the things you're supposed to do, signed the lease, and then I completely panicked. And I was in my head, I was thinking, oh my gosh, what have you just done? Who are you to like have your own studio space? What if nobody comes to shooting it on and on and on and on? And I very nearly let the anxiety get the better of me and almost sort of backed out of it, being like, oh, we'll just do this later. Like, no, 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 not right now. But I didn't. And I ultimately went through with it. I picked up the keys and then took it day by day. So for me, I think this was a twofold win. First of all, being able to sustain my own space, which felt quite major, but more importantly, being able to trust myself to get through this big decision and that it was going to be okay.
And that is such a great story because I remember actually when you first got that studio and you were sharing it, and I came to that space and had a session in that space. And I think you're right. Like, I think that whole sort of, oh my God, this is actually real. It's almost like I've grown up in my business now and I'm making it legitimate because we don't
Yeah.
start with studios. We don't start with all the best camera equipment. We don't start with all of that
No.
stuff. I mean, my computer is sitting on a toaster right now. So the fact that you, the fact that you pushed through the fear, and I think that is the number one thing I hear the most from all women of all ages is just pushing through that fear and actually just going for it. And so now you've had that studio for what, 3 years now?
Like
4 years?
five, like a while.
5.
Maybe even six. Math is not my strong suit. Maybe even
Yeah.
six. I can't quite recall. It's been a while though, but yes, it did. And you're right, it did feel like that grown up moment, but almost to the point of where I was like, is this too grown up? Like, oh my goodness, am
Yeah.
I not grown up enough for this? So I really had to sort of just calm myself, trust that like everything I had put into the meticulous decision making process was valid and then see it through
Love
versus
it.
sort of reneging and making myself wait even longer.
I love it. I love it. Okay, I have another question for you.
Okay.
What advice do you have for hesitant women who are over 50 who are considering entrepreneurship?
Ooh, that's such a good one. So I think the piece of advice I would gently offer to women is, and this is going to sound so cliche, but I think start simply and start small, even minute, because I think when we hear this vernacular of sort of seize the moment of entrepreneurship or life or whatever we're talking about, the first thing that comes into mind is visions of grand gestures, huge transformations overnight, huge changes that we can kind of just roll out in an instant. And a lot of that can feel, first of all, a lot and quite scary. Well, at least it does to me. So, realistically, at least in my experience, most changes start very, very small. They're like a very tiny seed that you need to sort of take care of and nurture and watch grow slowly throughout a specific process. And there's a lot of movement, I think, that can happen from starting small, especially if you're not a giant step kind of person. Take it slow. I think there's also value in maybe understanding two things or reflecting on two things that the moment is going to happen whether you like it or not. And the moment is going to pass you by whether you like it or not. And while we can't necessarily control either of those realities, what we do have power over is what we think in the moment, what we do in the moment, how we react in the moment, and to some degree, how we feel in the moment. So I don't think it's ever too late, in my opinion, to take one small step in the direction that you want to go. Specifically in entrepreneurship as well. If you look around, there are businesses everywhere doing all sorts of things, from selling like teeny tiny candies wrapped up in, I don't know, something that looks like a little kitten packaging, to, big conglomerates doing, who knows what. So I think if you can start small, you can build towards whatever it is you're hoping to do or experience. And one more thing on this, I think women specifically, I think we seem to hold on to this belief sometimes that, oh, well, I haven't done it to date, which means I cannot begin now. Like, for
Mm-hmm.
example, oh, I haven't danced for the past 20 years, so I can't possibly start now. And it's just not true. I think you can start at whatever point you happen to be at in your life. And I think every beginning, especially in business, is a baby step. And that's kind of what ultimately makes the big transformation.
Yeah, I love that. It reminds me of a very good friend of mine. He has always said, think big, start small, but act now. And I think
Yes.
that just sort of summarizes exactly what you just said there, because I think we get into this like, oh, I've got this idea. I want to create this business, as you say. And then all of a sudden our mind goes to, oh my God, how am I going to handle it all? I've got stuff going on right now. But yeah, life is in its transitions. And as we transition into perhaps entrepreneurship, it's one baby step at a time. It's design what you want it to look like and then just start. And from my business perspective, that's how I start with my clients. It's like, let's get the vision set, let's get the idea set, and let's find that one client, your first client. That's it. We're not
Yes.
going to build out big websites. And I see this a lot. And I think what ends up happening is a lot of people, whether men or women of any age, really, the first thing that they think is they have to have this great photo shoot, these great photos
Yeah.
for their website. They have to build out this great website. They have to build out all these things before they get started. And one thing that they've missed along the way is just even testing the viability of the business in the first place. And I know I've been a factor of that as well, like where I've started a business and, we had to have all this grandiose stuff where we probably should have just started in the little incubator and then let it
Yeah.
grow.
Yeah, and I think we've all been there as businesswomen as well. You're absolutely right, where we get so caught up in all the glossy stuff. And believe me, I love the glossy stuff. That's why I do
Mm-hmm.
photography. That's why I do a lot of branding work. But I think there's so much more power in if you spend time on your brand strategy, which is sort of exactly what you're speaking to, where it's you build out the idea, you test it, stay in the cozy, warm incubator for a while just to make sure that the thing can hatch, make sure the thing can take some
Mm-hmm.
sort of shape, and then move it into the next phase and the next phase. Anytime you break anything down into a series of very tiny steps, it's suddenly it feels far more achievable than if you have the one goal written on the page, which is this giant, giant vision. And I'm a big supporter of the giant vision, but that can feel very overwhelming and very murky. Like, how on earth do I get there? But if you write down all the steps, even if you're having a day where you're not quite feeling motivated and you're not quite perhaps feeling super confident, if the one thing on your list is, oh, send this one email, you can do that. That's a win for the day. That's a baby step
Mm-hmm.
in the right direction.
Mm-hmm.
And I think
Yeah.
that matters.
Yeah. That's great. So I've got two more questions and then we're going to get full into like the backstory of how you started your business. But what did actually inspire you to go into photography and then actually turn it into more than just perhaps a hobby?
So, honestly, a layoff, which is not the most
Oh,
inspiring
okay.
answer in the world. My first career was in publishing. I worked as a multi brand editor, I worked as an editorial coordinator and a writer. I picked up photography so that I was more hireable as a writer. So I could go and cover a story, but also shoot it at the same time.
Okay.
So I could do two things
Oh,
sort
I
of in
love
one.
that.
Yeah, it was really fun. I definitely enjoyed it. To get into publishing, after university, I worked multiple full time unpaid internships and a whole slew of part time jobs. So I could afford to do the unpaid internships. I did everything from wash dogs to retail to coffee shops to, you name it, I kind of picked up a part-time job in that space. And then I ultimately ended up moving for a corporate position and at a much bigger company. Cut to one day, I went into the office, I was pulled into a meeting, and I was told that my entire division, of which I was a part of, obviously, was being cut due to budget constraints. And just like that, my entire life that I had moved from one city to this other city completely crumbled around me. And I was left very, very shell shocked. So once that shock sort of wore off, I realized I was facing a decision. I could either move again for a job again that I had sort of started to realize wasn't going to give me the stability I was looking for, or I could start working for myself. And when I was trying to make this decision, I realized I had been so willing to work for free for other people for a long time. What would have happened if I put all that energy into myself? So this idea when you start a
Oh
business,
my God, Meg, I got to stop you because I just got chills on that. Because, oh my God, we love to give away stuff for free because I don't know. And I want to talk about
yeah,
that because let's talk about that because I give away a lot for free, but it's because I want to as well. But there is that fear of selling yourself. So, okay, so keep going. Sorry about that. It's
no,
just
no,
such a
no.
great story. Like,
Oh,
yeah.
thank you. But it is true. I had been the idea of taking on like a full time, we're talking 40 hours a week here, unpaid internship was a no. I was like, yes, absolutely. Let's do it. This will get me where I want to go. So then when I reframed that into like, what if I put 40 hours into working for myself, my own thing? That didn't feel scary. A lot of times when you start a business, you hear of the what if you don't make any money? And it's like, well, I've already had that experience. I already went through not making money and washing dogs part time at a grooming shop to pay my rent and pay my groceries and things like that. So I was like, I could do this. The difference is doing it for myself. So that's what I decided to do instead of going back to work for somebody else. And that's how Gooseberry Studios opened in 2013, 10 years ago now. And the ultimate deciding factor was I just decided if my life was going to fall apart. At the time, it felt very much like it was falling apart, like the rug had been pulled out of me completely. And I just decided if that was going to happen again, I wanted more control over it, over how it was going to happen. Not that you ever really have control, I understand that, but I would be able to react and do something about it versus a boss just saying this is the way it is, and then you have no options.
Right.
So I think starting my business has been definitely one of the best things I've done in my life. I wish I had a better story in terms of I felt really moved
It's
and
a great
compelled to
story.
do this, but it was really a cause and effect situation.
Honestly, here's what I'll tell you. The one thing I know for sure, it's for most people, I would probably say 98% of the people I've spoken to over the past 10 years, it has been an event that has caused them to start the business. And whether it's a layoff, a divorce, a death, just being
Interesting.
tired of life in general, going to that 9 to 5, it's been an event. And so your event was you were laid off and you had this aha moment of realizing, well, I was giving my stuff away for free anyway, and my time and my talent away for free. So what's the fear of going out and trying to start on my own? As you said, I could make money or not, but I'm not making any money giving my money, giving my time and talent away for free now. So what's
Exactly.
the big, and I think we have to have that aha moment. There's got to be something that creates that. So good for you. Congratulations. So one more
Thank you.
question is, being an entrepreneur, what does it give to you? And I'm talking here specifically like freedom. I think that at the end of the day, we all hope for something and it all sort of boils down to freedom. Now, there's different versions of freedom, but that's
Yeah.
kind of where I'm headed with that question. What does, your studio, your talents, your entrepreneurship give you?
So I love this question, by the way, and I love the framing of that question as well. Being an entrepreneur gives me the creative everyday way of work and life that feels most content and fulfilling for who I am. And I think that's um, very much a result of my relationship to time as an entrepreneur. I get to control my schedule now. I get to control how I spend my time far more than I ever would have working for anybody else. And that does feel really freeing. And I think that freedom piece, that freedom theme is a huge, huge part of it. If I don't want to start work till 10 a.m., I don't necessarily have to now. If I want to bring my dogs to the studio, which I'm obsessed with, like I'm allowed to, I don't have to get somebody to sign off on that. If I want to take a chunk of time off through the summer to do whatever, and that could be just binge Netflix on a show I'm into, or, go on a trip or whatever, I can do that without having to wait for permission for, again, somebody else to review the time slip and say yes or no. And now that's not to paint it all as like through rose colored glasses. Obviously,
Yeah.
being an entrepreneur is challenges, there's ups and downs. But anytime those challenges happen, I try to think to myself, well, so does working for somebody else. There's challenges there too, but at least this way I still get to control my time for the most part. And I think it's so funny. I think we're often led to believe that like a beautiful life is all about the big, big things, the huge trips, the fancy events, the designer clothes, which don't get me wrong, are so fun. Absolutely. But
Mm-hmm.
for me, I think I draw the most fulfillment out of everyday moments. And that could be the flow in my workday, to the kind of projects I'm working on, to being able to just like unplug for an hour and go out in the garden if I want to on a Wednesday. And being an entrepreneur for me gave me greater access to more of those everyday moments. I didn't have to just wait for the weekend to sort of cram them all into 48 hours. So I think that is probably what entrepreneurship gives me the most of. And I work really hard with my clients as well, whether working on their photography or their brand strategy, to help them figure out what their creative everyday way of work and life is, and help them take steps towards that. And it's going to look completely different for everybody. Not everyone's going to be thrilled to have their dogs at work and go in the garden
Yeah.
like I am, but that's what sort of fills me up on a day-to-day basis.
But that's what it is. Freedom is individual. It's to what you want. And like for me, it's time zone freedom right now. That is what I am
Mm.
working on. I have location freedom. I have, all time freedom, but I missing time zone freedom. I am kind of stuck in North American time zone right now, but I want to move on. And so what do I have to do to get that? And so design the vision, design the path, and then get
Yeah,
executing on it. So perfect. Okay, well that is amazing. Thanks, Laura.
thank you.
Um, I'm going to get into the actual backstory now. So you and I met. First of all, welcome to This Is 50.
Thank you. I'm so delighted to
I'm
be here.
Thank you. And I am super happy to have you. You and I have known each other for roughly, I guess, about 3 or 4 years, 5 years possibly. I don't even remember how I got in touch with you, but
I was
you
trying to
and
think of this too, and I can't actually remember either.
I was looking for a photographer because that was a few years ago, and I was in this mindset. Oh my God, I need to, before I can start my business, I need a website and I need professional photographs.
Yeah.
I would tell people now today that's not the path, but that's the path I took. So I think somebody knew you. I was asking, and somebody referred you. So you and I've had 3 sessions together, but what I want you to do is just give a little bit of background on yourself, who you are, and your business, and then we'll kind of get further into the story of Laura and Gooseberry.
So yes, my name's Laura. I am the owner and the founder of Gooseberry Studios, which opened in 2013. I am a commercial photographer, a brand strategist, and I create limited edition fine art prints as well. My main driver and motivator is to help people build their ideas forward meaningfully and beautifully, be that something for their professional path or something they have as an idea for a personal project, and helping people feel very confident in the steps that they are going to take to make those things a reality and make them more a part of their everyday life. So I'm very passionate about, I'm the girl at the party basically, who, I'm very bad at small talk, and I at the girl at the party, so like we get to talking, someone's like, yeah, I'd like love to run a bakery one day. And it'll be an offhanded comment, and I will unfortunately pounce on this poor person and be like, cool, what have you thought about? We could do this or this or this. Have you thought
Yeah.
about that? What are your recipes? I've always been that kind of person. So channeling that into the studio gave it a more productive outlet than cornering unsuspecting individuals at social gatherings and talking their ear off.
Right. So you and I um, have had a couple of photography sessions, and when you and I were chatting on our pre-call about having this session, you talked a lot about being inspired to work with women over 50. Not that that's your only niche, but that you have sort of a, you've been inspired to do so. And so talk to me a little bit about what inspired you in the first place to work with women over 50.
So I had a very unique experience growing up. Both of my grandmothers, maternal and paternal grandmothers, lived with us. And I've always been surrounded by, them and their friends. So there were always lots of older ladies sort of like in my orbit. And I was just always so inspired by what people who were older than me had in terms of stories, in terms of life experience, in terms of wisdom to impart, in terms of really funny encounters. Like there was a whole rich, juicy, beautiful life that they would share with me, over cups of tea and, whatever we were doing. And I think that's followed me as I've grown up. I'm in my mid 30s now, and I am constantly drawn to older women because I find them so fascinating and just so like they're these untapped resources. And I don't mean that condescendingly. I just mean like there's so much there's so much there to learn from. And what I really loved once women over 50 started kind of visiting me in the studio and we started photographing sessions together was just the wealth of knowledge and life experience that lived there. And I was so inspired by that. And every time I work with a woman who's 50 plus, I come away just feeling like, oh my gosh, so much is possible. And everything that sort of happens in a life, not to make light of huge life events, obviously, but everything that
Yeah.
happens in life ends up kind of just becoming part of the story. It's part of this huge like novel that's sort of unfolding. And I think it's easy to forget that, regardless of where you are in your life. But when you hang out with somebody who is at a different life stage than you are, and when you work closely with them, especially on their goals and their dreams and their vision, it just completely changes your perspective. So
Mm-hmm.
that's what I really, really love about it on a personal level. And then on the professional level, I really love meeting women who are at this different stage of life than I am, who are doing incredible next chapter things and really going for
Mm-hmm.
it. And if photographing them can help them achieve that in any sort of way, I'm all for it. Like, I think that's so special to be able to just play some small part in terms of like, oh, this might help like get you to your next step or where you're going, in the next year or whatever. So kind of a twofold thing, but I
Yeah.
think both of those, it really sticks with me. And I just love it. It's
Mm-hmm.
very inspiring and uplifting, I find.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. So when you are capturing them, like when they come into the studio, what do you notice that might be different for some I'll just go back to my experiences with you. I mean, I'm not the best person in front of a camera at all. I don't know what I do, but I freeze. And and even now, okay, so like even now my braces, so now I'm not smiling, and I feel like as I've aged, gotten more and more insecure. I was never great in front of a camera. Now I feel like I'm terrible in front of a camera, and I'm not looking for you to say, "Oh no."
Well,
What
I'm
I'm
going to disagree strongly, but
yeah.
anyway, continue.
But but I do know on our third session together, and we should maybe talk about that shoot, is I went in with a whole complete different mindset. I went in with a mindset of what do I want to portray for other women so that they get the courage and, you know, what, if she can do it, I can do it too. And I think even like we went on location, so to speak. We found a really great space that had great lighting, and obviously you're an amazing photographer, so you grab that
Thank
together.
you.
And I don't know, I feel like it was a mindset shift that I had to take to get into that space and to get in front of that camera. And so take me through some of the other women that you have have photographed who are over 50, and what are you trying to kind of get out of them to capture in that those photos?
This is a great question as well. So deep. I love
Throwing them at you.
it.
I hope you've had your coffee today.
I have it right here beside me for this very
Okay,
reason.
yeah, yeah.
No, great question. So I think it's very interesting when I work with women of this demographic, 50 plus, there are two very distinct camps. There are the women who are just, I don't care about anything anymore in the sense of like being held back or being in their own heads, or they're like, this is just like who I am, 50 and fabulous, let's go. They are not the larger of the two camps. The larger
No.
camp are the women who come in who feel a bit anxious about having their photo taken. They want to do it, but they come in feeling anxious. They come in feeling like maybe they need to lose weight before they can do it. They come in maybe feeling like they have to have professional hair and makeup before they're quote unquote camera ready, which by the way, camera ready is just a term that should be eviscerated. It's not a thing. And there's a lot of apprehension and maybe a lack of confidence too, which I always find interesting because they are there in the studio. So they, on the one hand, they do definitely want to do it, which is, I think,
Mm-hmm.
incredible. And the biggest hurdle to get over, just getting through the door into the studio. But yeah, there's a lot of sort of comparison game, regardless, like maybe they're comparing themselves to images they see in the media or younger women who are in their life or even their younger selves. Because as women, we do have this tendency to be so hard on ourselves, where when we look back on a photo of ourselves, maybe like 5 or 10 years, we'll look back on it far kinder than we look at it in
Oh,
the moment. I do this, like everybody does this. I don't know anyone who
I know.
doesn't.
I know.
And it's very interesting. So to help them sort of, I think there's a few things. I think first of all, the step one for feeling more confident on camera is to sort of start breaking down, as you say, this mindset of, oh, the photo has to be perfect. It's not a good photo. Again, this is air quote, good photo, which there is no such thing really, I don't think. But there's no such thing as the photo has to be perfect in order to be good, in order to be validating for myself as a woman on camera. I think untangling that, there's a lot of societal expectations that play into that. There's a lot, we're bombarded with media images at every screen you look at now, your phone, social media, TV, everything. We're just bombarded with images that don't always necessarily hold realistic beauty standards. So that seeps in. You kind of have to tackle
Mm-hmm.
that, untangle that a
Mm-hmm.
little bit.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of having to step into embracing yourself in the moment. I hear a lot from women in this demographic of, oh, like now I have fine lines, now there's this, now there's that, because your body changes. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's, I think, just part of growing up. And again,
Facts.
I don't want to
Mm-hmm.
sound condescending at all, but I see this in
No.
myself even, I'm 35 and I'll have, moments like, oh, this and this and this, it doesn't look like when I was 18. Well, of course it doesn't. Like a decade has passed. Like it can't,
Right.
right? So it just physically can't. So I think there's a lot of having to be kind to yourself in the moment, accepting as is beauty as beautiful versus I need to sort of fix all these things before I
Right.
can have my photo taken. And I think ultimately understanding that and accepting that a photo is not the be all and end all. It doesn't say, and it cannot ever say everything about you. And I do think as women, we put this pressure on ourselves to, I'm having my picture taken. It must show everything about myself, which is
Mm-hmm.
so impossible. That's like trying to do 20,000 things in one breath, and it just cannot be done. I think instead shifting the mindset to be like, this is my moment in time. It's capturing me in this sliver of my life right now as a beat of what's happening in my greater story.
Right.
I think once you can kind of embrace that, a little bit of relaxation comes in. And when relaxation comes in, you're able to sort of look at yourself in the moment with those kinder eyes we talked about when you reflect back
Yeah, well,
and
let's
have
talk a
fun with
little bit
it.
about that. Exactly.
Sure.
Let's talk about that. So Absolutely. I'm pretty sure everybody on this that's listening to this podcast right now would say to you, yes, that is absolutely. I've taken a photo and I felt in that moment, oh, terrible. But then 10 years later, I look at that same photo and wish that I looked like that 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So what what is it that you do when people are thinking that? Like, not everybody's in front of your camera going, "Oh, I look fabulous," you know? It's how do you how do you say to them, "Let's capture this moment in time because XYZ."
hmm I think so. First and foremost, I work really hard to make the moment fun
Mhm.
because I think fun is a bomb for a lot of things. And I think often when you go in to have a photo taken, you can kind of fall in this trap of almost becoming statuesque. It's like, oh, I have to stand still and the head tilts this way and the eyes look that way and the foot goes this way. And when you're doing all of that, if you're not a professional model and that's not second nature to you, that is going to feel incredibly stressful, which is just going to make everything feel worse. So,
Mhm.
first and foremost, I like to bring a lot of fun into the session, be that blasting music, be that movement, be that dancing around. I'm a bit of a chatty person. So, chattering nonstop just to sort of, you know, put the focus somewhere else versus like, oh, it's somebody you don't perhaps know very well in your face with a big lens and a camera. That first and foremost, I think really helps. Secondly, showing people what I'm shooting as I'm shooting helps. It's a very collaborative experience. So rather than go in and have your photo taken and the back of the camera is a big secret to you, you don't see it for 3 weeks. I always make sure my clients see exactly what we're shooting. So they have a sense of how it's translating right away versus just being on display and not really knowing how it's going to come together. The benefit of that also is then we can make little tweaks. So for instance, if they're
Yeah,
like, oh, is that how I'm smiling? That's not how I usually smile. It's like, okay, cool. Let's try
right.
again. How do you usually smile? Or if they're like, oh, I think my hair is a bit too floofy on this one. Totally valid. If you're not loving how your hair looks, we can then fix it and tweak it boots on the ground, right? Versus
Right.
trying to wrestle it in post. So I think those two things really help. And I think also just framing out the session as how is this going to help you or support you in this moment in time. So a lot of it's kind of, I guess, bringing in the strategy piece a little bit to the photography session in terms of, oh, this image would be great on like a contact page. This image would be great in a media kit. This image could work here, and there, helping them see the shots not just as a direct reflection of themselves, but also as a tool for how they're going to work on the goal. Because ultimately, when you're coming in to have your photo taken for a branding session specifically, it's for the betterment of the business. It's not
Right.
necessarily like a shot just for you, as much as it will double as that, I hope. It is about how do we use this then in the platform that you're building or in the audience you're hoping to nurture. So I think those things can help a lot. And the first one's always the hardest. Do you know what I mean? Like the first
Hmm.
time you're doing
The first
something,
session, you
the
mean?
first
Yeah.
session, yeah.
Yeah.
If you again,
Yeah.
if you don't have your picture taken a lot, it's going to feel a bit uncomfortable. It shouldn't feel
Exactly.
like dreadfully uncomfortable, but it's going to feel a bit like, oh, what am I doing? This is new. What do I do with my hands? What do I
Yeah.
do with this and that? Um, but again, your photographer should work with you very closely to meet you where you're at. It's not about here's a formula, this is the posing guide, let's do it. It's about really tapping into who you are as an individual, feeling out what feels good for you and what feels good in your body versus forcing you into a pose like a pretzel that's just not going to work or feel
Yeah.
nice. So I think,
Laura, I just want to go back to that one thing that you said about using these photos as a brand for your brand story. And I think that's something that I want you to unpack a little bit more
sure.
because we often think that we may think when we go into a session, oh, I need some photos for my website or to throw on my social media, and they're one and done. But I like what you said about how you can take those photos and take it through even further. And I think originally, or you had said, I'm telling, we may not be telling your whole story in these photos, but we're telling part of a story. And I love that because storytelling is so important. It's how you build trust. It's how you're going to, get people to like know, like, and trust you kind of thing. That's sort of cliche, but it's true.
No, it's
Um,
true.
yeah. So that's, I think, from my perspective, uh, why would you recommend somebody do a brand shoot? Even maybe they don't have a full-fledged brand yet, even,
Mhm.
or they do. And so what are you wanting them to think about when they're coming into the studio? Because it's not just like, oh, well, I think that sitting on that chair over there would be great, or I think standing over there would be great, because you and I have talked about it, where we put together a little PowerPoint presentation of like all the different things that we wanted to try to capture and
Yeah,
where I would use some of those photos moving forward. So talk a little bit about brand shooting.
sure. So brand shooting, I think first and foremost, it's important to keep in mind that it's not just about a pretty picture. It's about a picture that will serve you, hopefully in multiple ways, with whatever you're doing in your brand ecosystem at the time. So I think it's very important to plan out a commercial branding session first and foremost. Preparation just helps to alleviate some stress. So think about where you would like to use your photos. Shooting for a website is very different than shooting for social, let's say. If you want both, your photographer needs to be mindful so they can capture images that pull double duty for you. Um, Before you get to any of that, though, it's really important to have a deep understanding of your brand. And I always like to frame it out this way: you would never buy furniture for a room without measuring the room, right?
Exactly. Or
Because
even
what's
doing
going
a storyboard for, like, even just like understanding what you
yeah,
want the room to look like.
exactly, because what's
you
going to
know
happen? That couch is getting wedged in the door. The table is going to be too short for the couch. Like, it's not going to work. It's not going to feel cohesive or intentional or comfortable, even. So, I like to say, like, if you understand your brand first and foremost, that should be the mission. It should be the story that you're hoping to tell, how you want to communicate those things, how you want to show up in the brand. Are you wanting to be the face of it? Are you wanting to be sort of like a third party bystander and the brand has its own unique voice? What are the key messages you want to impart, aka the conversations you want to be generating, leading, attracting people into? How are you going to be helping people through the brand? All of those things help to inform your photos. So definitely
Right.
invest time in the strategy piece before just getting all dressed up and all planned out to take pictures, because a pile of pretty pictures that you can't activate won't serve you well. But a
Yeah.
pile of pictures that has been created with intention, the story in mind, as you say, the strategy component, those will go longer. And a branding session, when it's done well, should be able to serve your brand for at least, I would say, 10 to 12 months before
Absolutely.
maybe needing a refresh. And I think those
Yeah.
things, they will make or break a session more so than like,
Absolutely.
what does my hair look like? Those are the pieces
Exactly.
to focus
Or what?
on.
Yeah, what clothing or whatever. Clothing is important, but
It's
because you're trying to
important.
portray something, but it's not just it's all those elements together to tell the story.
Yeah, and the branding conversation is interesting too because, and this might be an unpopular opinion, but I personally don't think a brand is necessarily you, the person, in your entirety. It's a reflection of you, just like your home is a reflection of you, but it's not necessarily
Mhm.
you. And your wardrobe is a reflection of you, but it's not necessarily you, the person. And I think thinking of a brand as an extension of yourself versus your whole self, that can help alleviate some stress too. And that can in turn help make photography for this purpose feel more comfortable and more achievable, because it's not about capturing your entire 360-degree being. It's about capturing you through the lens of this specific element of your life. And sometimes doing
Absolutely.
that, that's not to say show up without authenticity and to show up without being true
Correct.
to who you are. It's just take the pressure off of it. You don't have to show every single thing about yourself because it's just a reflection of you. Just like when you pick out, I don't know, a car to drive, it's just a reflection of your style, not necessarily this car
Right.
is who I am and my whole identity.
Part of me, something that I'm kind of getting really in tune with, even for myself and my business, is a term called lifestyle integration. And I think that's possibly replacing work life balance. But for me, lifestyle integration is exactly that. It's showing my audience who I am as a person, but also how the things I love to do, but also my business. And it should look as one. And I feel like that's a little bit about what you're talking about in terms of the brand story is I I'm not just my my mastermind groups and my coaching business, I am Lynette that also does all these other things. And I think that's important to show, to get that authentic, true you. And so you and I have been talking about maybe doing another shoot, and I want to get to a place where it's a lifestyle type shoot where it's really showing the outcomes of being an entrepreneur, going after time freedom, location freedom, and now time zone freedom. I really want that to come across because I hope it inspires others to do the same and to really think of their life as one complete thing, not my family, my work, and me kind of thing. So
Yeah.
I want to get into a little bit more now the mindset of an entrepreneur. And I know you're not 50. I actually should have said that, clarify. I mean, clearly you don't look 50. So, and I think because most of my guests are 50, but I have had other guests that are not. But yeah, but it doesn't matter how old you are. Starting a business comes with you need to have like a really strong backbone. You have to have tenacity and this fierce desire to get something done and to do it. But there are days where you're just going to want to feel like you roll over and not get it done. I had one of those yesterday. I was tired. I had a headache. I just hung up the day, so to speak. I chilled out. I did nothing on my business. I just worked on Lynette getting a little bit of rest. So talk to me about the mindset, because I know I've watched you on social. You and I have talked about this over the years about sometimes you love social and then sometimes you hate social, and you've stayed focused on your business, but there's days. So talk to me about the mindset behind running a business for 5, 6, 7 years now. And how do you get through those ups and downs, if you will?
Well, I'm sorry to hear you just had one of those days so
Oh yeah.
recently. That sucks.
Yeah, no, it's okay.
Yeah. So the studio just had its 10th anniversary this past June. And it's funny because I think when I started, I sort of, maybe not consciously, but somewhere tucked in the back of my brain was like, oh, well, like if I ever reach year 10, like this weird feeling will go away. Newsflash, it doesn't, right? Like that's
Mhm.
always sort of in ebbs and flows. Um, Something I keep in mind when those days happen is again going back to that concept of, well, I still get to control my time, and there have been moments over the years where I've been like, oh, maybe I should just submit a resume and go back and work for somebody else. And then I never send the resume because I'll get to the point where I'm like, oh, actually, you don't want to do this. Even when you have a really bad day in your own business, for me, it still feels better than having to go in, do a 9 to 5, only have coffee breaks at specific times or whatever the corporate landscape looks like now. Full disclosure, I haven't been in it in 10 years, so I have no idea what it actually looks like these days. Um, I think staying focused on what's right in front of you can really help pull you out of those days. For me, if those days pop up, it's often I'm getting too caught up in the what ifs of what hasn't happened yet. You know, what's my next year going to look like? What's happening with this campaign? What should I do for this launch? Blah, 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 blah. And it's just a bit of overwhelm, right? So I need to bring myself back to the work that is currently on my desk, in my inbox, focus on those projects. And that often helps to alleviate anxiety or doubt that is popping up or coming in. Um, I think in terms of like imposter syndrome, because funny enough, that doesn't go away either, which you
Never.
would think it would, but it's so
Never.
bizarre. It's a
I
stage
know.
5 clinger. It's always kind of like on you. um, so I think when imposter syndrome pops up, for me as a photographer specifically, I have a different approach with the strategy stuff, but with when it pops up with photography, I take myself off to shoot something just for me. No clients involved, no other people, just go and do a concept just for me. Go and bring the play back into it. That often helps. And sometimes even just looking through past sessions can help, being like, oh yeah, I did that shoot. Oh yeah, that happened as well. Just remind yourself of the things you have done. It's so easy to sort of gloss over those pieces. And then it just feels like you're in this vacuum of doubt, being like, well, I've done nothing. And it's like, no, everyone has done something. Like pull back a little bit, take in the bigger picture. And that can sometimes feel reassuring. Ultimately, though, the thing that really helps is just get a cup of tea, get
Yeah.
outside, and my mom always says this to me. She'll be like, not so much with business stuff. That's not really stuff we talk about at length necessarily. But, if I'm spiraling about something, she'll listen for a while and she'll be like, okay, love, I think you just need to go get a cup of tea,
Yeah.
go have a walk, call me back in 30 minutes after a walk. And then I would usually call back. And how are you feeling? I'm like, yeah, it's a bit better. It's so annoying that
Yeah.
works. But know
Yeah.
what your arsenal of little self-care hits are. For me, it's
And
tea.
support network,
For sure.
right?
Yeah,
Like,
and your
and
support
you
network.
called your mom, like think through that. Like, and they say that I mean, we all know that entrepreneurship is a lonely road. And it's when you're just a little person making a business for yourself, you may not always have this massive team that other people have that keeps them going and motivated. I don't have a producer walking in my door in the morning saying, hey, okay, we're going to shoot this, 2 or 3 podcasts today and let's go, and just sort of briefing. And then, your rah cheerleader. I have me. And
Yeah,
I
no,
wake up,
yeah, and I think as
yeah,
well, it's whenever a challenge pops up in entrepreneurship, there's usually like a more formal 9 to 5 comparison point, right? So for instance,
right.
if I have imposter syndrome, like, oh, I've got to go and like, try and make a sale about this, like, oh, I can't sell, blah, blah. Maybe I should go work for someone else. And then it's like, but you'd have to sell yourself in that
So
interview. It's the same thing.
exactly,
So
exactly.
when I bring myself back to that, it's always like, okay, well, which arena would you rather be in? And for me, it's always been, I would like to work for myself, run my own business where I have more creative control, more
Right,
the time freedom, all those things we've already talked about. So
right,
yeah, I think just know yourself, know what feels right to you, because entrepreneurship is not for everyone. And I don't mean that rudely. I know many people who are in a corporate setting who love it, who are thriving there, who it's built the exact everyday way of life they want.
right.
Incredible. Just know where you want to be. The reason I know entrepreneurship is for me is because every time over the past 10 years, if I've come close to like whipping up a resume, I never click send because I'm like,
Oh,
yeah, no,
thank
you don't
God.
want this. So, yeah,
Right.
so being
And
really
it's
true
true
to who you
because
are.
exactly. And I think there are a lot of women, a lot of people, but for our perspective, a lot of women who even in their 50s get laid off from their job. And the first thing they're doing is they're looking for that next job in the
Mhm.
same role, same whatever, without really truly understanding the reality of why she got laid off in the first place. And it's likely because her tenure is at the end. And as terrible as that sounds, it is a fact of life. And that's the number one reason why I chose to start working with women over 50 to start businesses, because there are passions, there are hobbies, there are things that they were doing in their full-time job that they could now teach others, and they don't have to do it uh, in a corporate environment. But it's that false sense of security that comes with that resume and that full-time job. And when things go tough in an entrepreneurial world, that's the first thing we often revert to. I just, you know what? I'm going to just brush off my resume. I'm going to update my LinkedIn profile, and I'm going to start. I think you can actually on LinkedIn change your thing to like I'm looking or something like that. I don't know. Maybe I'm lying, but that's what we go to. Our and I don't do that anymore. I mean, I used to 3 or 4 years ago, but 3 or 4 years ago, I had a real aha. I was trying to jam myself into a square, that square peg into a round hole for almost 6 months, while I thought it would be better for me, safer for me to go and get a full-time job, because this entrepreneurial road that I've been on has never been a straight line. It has always been that of circular, that you can see, like life is A to B straight line, but actually in reality, life is A to B in circular, crazy kind of motions. And I think the feeling I had when I was looking for that full-time job, brushing off my resume, updating my LinkedIn profile, was of desperation. It just felt like I was going swimming upstream, like the salmon and salmon season, like I hated how I felt. And I felt like a shrinking violet while I was doing it. And it was just one day where I went, no, stop. And I had a conversation with myself. What are you doing? You're good at what you do. You just have to keep going. You have to push through. This is a tough time. And I did. And that was 3 years ago. So we all know what timing that was from a COVID perspective. But we were all a little crazy at that time. But it was such a good aha for me to realize I was never meant to be a full-time person. I was always meant to be an entrepreneur or even an intrapreneur. But that's only just a new term now, but it was to come up with your own ideas. And like you said, whether you're in a full-time job or on your own, you're selling. You're selling in the interview, you're selling to clients, you're pitching ideas, but you have this false sense of security because you're getting this regular paycheck. But just think about breaking through that for one moment and in your own business, and you're going to make 10 times the amount of money that you ever will working as a full-time employee. So yeah, thank you. I wanted to get into the
Yeah.
mindset a little bit more because
I
it
think,
happens at any age.
yeah, totally. And if I could just add one thing onto that, I think as well, it's something that really helped me when I was starting. So when I was in like year 1 or 2 of my business, maybe even year 3, business, the term felt like a very big, vague, mysterious thing. Like, what is it? How do you do business? How is this work? Like, what is the secret to it? And what I ultimately learned and what I still believe today is that business is really just about people. So entrepreneurship is really just about people. It's about, so forget
Mhm.
social. You mentioned earlier how I have a love hate relationship with social media. I 1000% do. And I made the decision about 3 years ago now to move my business away from social media intentionally because it wasn't a space that was necessarily making me feel good creatively. It was feeling quite draining, blah, 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 blah. And you can do that because you focus on the people. So I focused on my, existing client base, which I was fortunate enough to have because I had built that up over many years. Focusing on one-on-one connections, focusing on how to be of greater support to people who I already work with. And I think regardless of if you have a client base or not existing, remembering that business is about people will help you all of a sudden connect what you do to others in a more organic and genuine way, I think, versus having to speak in marketing terms or having to speak
Exactly.
in a way that social media likes the most. I think bring it back to I'm connecting with a human right now. How can I be of help to what this person needs or is looking for? And again, that might be an
I don't think it's
simplification. Oh my gosh,
oversimplified.
words.
Not at all. I can tell you that even 20 years ago, when I was a full-time employee, one of our senior VPs used to always say, I've worked for like many, many years for a bank. And he used to always say, we're not in the banking business, we're in the people business. And it sort of
Mm,
sounded fluffy and a bit like, okay, sure. But it's true. If you think about just being of
it's
service to
true.
somebody that you're going and you do something great for them, by nature, you're going to get the next referral, the next referral, the next referral. And that's how I'm pretty sure, to bring this whole thing full circle is how I met you. I met you because somebody loved how you take photographs, how you work with people. And so she said, this would be the person that I would recommend. And I actually do remember now the girl, she worked for CBC. I've forgotten her name, but I remember asking her, do you know anybody that does photographs? And
Oh,
she's
it's so
like, oh my
funny.
God, like this girl, this is the only person who I'd get my photos done by. So Laura,
It's so
thank you
heartwarming.
so, yeah,
So
thank you
nice.
so much. I wanted to just end it off by maybe going a little bit deeper into what you had said earlier about working for free and not being afraid to sell your services. I'm going to tack that on because that's something that I see a lot. Currently, in my current mastermind group, I have a mastermind group of maybe 10 or 12 women, and we've been working together for 2 years. I call it the early bird group. We meet every Tuesday. In the summer, we take a little tiny break, but we meet every Tuesday and we talk about our trials and tribulations of starting online businesses. And hands down, the number one thing that comes up is we would rather give away our content for free than to offer it for a very reasonable, valued dollar amount. And we get stuck in that way. So how did you move from, you were giving away your work for free because you were working as an intern, but then eventually that was your aha to kind of get out there and start selling your services. What fears did you have to push through to start selling your services?
That's such a good question again. What fears did I have to push through to sell my services? I think in a weird way, I didn't really have fear about that component because my work had been published, because I had experience already through like work placement and things like that. So I wasn't necessarily fearful of asking people for money for the service, because in my brain it was very much like it was a transaction. For this amount you get this, and that would be like very clearly delineated out in terms of this many photographs, this many hours of shoot time, etc. That piece didn't feel strange to me. What felt strange was knowing how much perhaps to charge when I was starting out, especially because there were all sorts of different ways to do it as a photographer at the time. And ultimately, what it came down to is I put myself in my client's shoes. So if I was looking to book a photo shoot, what would I want? What would I consider a reasonable amount for that exchange of work?
I love it.
And what I wanted the experience to be as somebody coming in. I knew what I didn't want in terms of if I was coming in and feeling nervous about having my picture taken. And that really helped me understand what I could offer to help alleviate those pain points in people and that anxiety in people. So that sounds so strange to be like, that wasn't the fearful part. The fearful part for me was like, will this work? Will people book me? That was the scary part. But again, that piece of the fear came down to showing my work, whether that was shooting for myself when I had no clients, right? Because nobody really starts with just like a beautiful roster of clients ready to go. Unfortunately, that's not the way this works. That's not how it comes to fruition. So for me, it was a question of shooting consistently, sharing that work so you can show people what you could do, what your style was, how you approach visual subject matter. And what I recommend to all of my clients is when you are at a point where you're ready to charge a dollar amount for the services and the value that you impart, keep in mind that you're not necessarily having to know everything to put that price point on your service. And I think, again, with women specifically, maybe it's a bit of perfectionism tendencies, maybe it's a bit of imposter syndrome kind of coming in, but there can be this mentality of, well, I'm not necessarily an expert in this thing, so I shouldn't charge for it. And I don't think you should charge as an expert if you're not an expert in something, but you maybe know more than the person coming up below you, right? Who's coming up behind you. So for myself, I'm very aware that I am not the greatest photographer in the world. I never will be. There are people decades ahead of me who are incredible, like magicians with the camera and what they can achieve. But I also know that I know a little bit more than the person who's maybe 21, 22, or whatever age they are, who is just starting to learn and just wanting to open a photography business. So if I do mentorship sessions or anything like that, I can gauge my price point based on my level of knowledge versus like, I will never charge what like an Annie Leibovitz charges. Of course not. That would be outrageous. But I can take stock.
Let's just clarify that though. Today.
Thank you. That's very kind of you. That's so sweet.
Sorry. I had to bring the dog on the lap because she was going crazy with the door. So I'm sorry.
Oh, no problem. We're very dog friendly.
She's making a debut into the This Is 50 podcast.
Oh my goodness.
Sorry. So exactly. So charging what you truly believe is value, what you would want to
Yeah,
charge, but not being afraid to, even like to your point, like what you said, like not charging any Lipowitz pricing. Well, but also know that as you grow and your business grows, your pricing grows with it, right?
yeah, like my prices today are not what they were 10 years ago, but I also now have a decade of experience behind me and a
Of course.
decade's worth of portfolio to back that experience up. So I think when you are figuring out what you would like to charge in a business, just be very, very honest. And being honest about your value is hard because you're either overselling, perhaps, that's a bit of ego at play, or you're underselling, which is like the imposter syndrome still clinging on you, right? So you kind of have to cut both
Right.
of those out if you can and come back to what I find helpful and I recommend to a lot of people is write down exactly what you add to people. Like, what do you actually impart? Because seeing it on a piece of paper in black and white, right in front of you, can be very empowering. And then you have a very clear understanding of, oh, this is what I can offer people. And then you can kind of price out according to that. I also think there's, I understand completely that there is fear around it's so much easier to give the work away for free, like you were saying. Like, oh yeah, just take it, just do this, just do that. But you will
Yeah.
hit a point where you need to pay your bills. For me, I need to feed my
Mhm.
dogs. When I was starting, my goal was I need to pay my rent, I need to feed my dogs, and I need to buy groceries for myself in that order. And
Right.
that was a huge motivator because it was like, I don't have a choice. If I'm not going to go and look for another job, for me back then, there was no choice except to hustle up and find people who would be willing to give me money for X, Y, and Z, whatever it was I was offering in a photography package. So I think it's not necessarily like there's shame around money or anything like that. It's just more knowing that you deserve to be compensated. And there's nothing ugly or wrong with that. You have something to offer to other people. And you would never walk into a dentist's office and expect them to fill a cavity for free. So why should your services be up for nothing?
Totally.
Right? And
Totally.
it's just
I love
frame it back
that.
out as a practical.
I love that. And that is one thing that, in my program, we do work through because it's from idea to first client. And so, yeah, what are you going to charge? And you may want to do, a pilot run. But even when I piloted my program a few years ago, I charged a very nominal fee, but it was more of a just put some skin in the game so I know you're going to show up. And I mean, not everybody did actually show up. I think that, I think a lot of people end up buying online programs and they actually just don't show up. I don't know. And that's maybe a whole other podcast. But, for the ones that did, it was just meant to it wasn't meant for me to make a lot of money. It was just meant for me to say, you know what, I'm not giving this away for free. And people will value this. And then my debrief at the end of the 6-week program was how much would you really pay for a program like this now that you've gone through it? So that was my sort of pilot run. Now I'm just actually getting ready to launch my next cohort.
Very
And
exciting.
yes, I know I'm super excited. But again, it's going to be this time. It's going to be value more money than I charged the first time around, but still a small cohort because for me it's important to learn and test and figure out how I can scale it moving forward. But and even probably for you from a scaling perspective, do you ever actually have intentions to scale your business? And if you do, what sort of things would you look at to sort of help you scale?
Such a great question again. So in terms of scaling, it's such a hot seat. I love it.
Yeah.
So I definitely have plans for. I think this 10 years is a big milestone. This has been a big milestone this summer, and it's funny because I haven't really talked about it in terms of any sort of like social posts or anything like that. I kind of just let it come and go. I maybe mentioned like once, like, oh wow, it's been 10 years. I do have plans in terms of where I would like to go. Um, I'm not sure it's necessarily scaling. Like, I'm very comfortable where I'm at. I don't know. I'm still undecided in terms of if I want. There was a time in my life where I was like, "Ooh, I'd love a studio with like 12 other photographers," and like, here we go. But I realized that in pursuing that, I actually wouldn't get to shoot as much. And I don't necessarily want to have a CEO role. That's a big job, as much as it's a title that a lot of people use and valid. I mean, you are when you're a one person show, totally. But if you are moving into scaling with a big team, the CEO job is very different from the job I do now. And that's not personally what I want to spend. Again, coming back to how I want to spend my everyday life. I love creating, I love working one on one with people in front of a camera. I love building their ideas forward. I might scale in terms of developing some new offerings and some new products and things like that. But I think first and foremost, before making a decision of that nature, it's really important to understand what brings you contentment, what brings you fulfillment, and what doesn't. So for me, I definitely know the idea of having a multiple team, like massive team situation is not for me. That I don't want to be a manager. That's not what lights me up. But that doesn't mean you can't scale in other ways with different offerings and
Absolutely.
products. So still to be decided. I'm just sort of still coming to terms with the fact that 10 years has passed and I don't quite know where the time went. So let me kind of unpack that a little bit first, and then I'll sort of figure out what my next steps. But I would recommend to anyone when you're in a growth state, a growth year, a growth season, really, really bring it. It's so easy to get caught up in what other people are doing. Oh, so and so did this. Like, I should do that too. And you go hard. And then you realize, oh, I don't actually love this. This isn't what it's taking me away from what I want to do, not bringing
Oh,
me more of what I want to do. So I think it's a delicate balance. You need to be very aware of yourself and where you're trying to take yourself.
I love that. I love that. I love that. I mean, I've had a couple of different businesses over the years, and the one business I did get into, I I felt like I had already hit terminal velocity, so I couldn't stop. But right when we were going live with it, I knew this was not
Oh,
going to be
you
the business for
knew.
me. I knew it, but I felt like I had a partner too at the time. So again, I didn't put myself first. I I put the business first, the idea first, the time, the effort, the money that we had already sunk into getting it started. And within a year we crashed and burned just because in actually, to be completely honest, it wasn't because it was a failure, it was actually too big of a success. We opened up this business and we had some press that took us from here startup to here, oh my god, and people lined up at the door and we couldn't keep up. And
Yeah.
then there's this feeling of me not even really, I hated my partner. I
Oh,
I loved
dear.
her as my friend, but I
Oh,
didn't
okay.
like her as a partner. Let me rephrase that. And the biggest mistake I think from our perspective is we were trying to be everything to everybody. So we were launching this, launching that, doing this, doing this. It was a food business, and like if anybody's ever been in a food business, it's a very difficult business. And we tried to start small, but we grew so fast through this one food critic who came in and did a ghost kitchen, or not a ghost kitchen, like came into our back kitchen and we cooked a bunch of food for him, gave him some food to take home. It was a gourmet to go type store. We were A, 5 years before our time, and B, uh, he was a really renowned food critic in the city that we were in, and everybody listened to him. So literally, quite frankly, the next day we had lined up. We saw these cars just lining up, and I just said to my partner, "Oh my God, we're dead." And then people wanted us to start catering for them. Like literally, they were bringing their dishes to the place, and we
Wow.
were making food so that they could take it home, and that was our sort of value prop: pass it off as your own. So I digress a little bit, but the
No, but a
point
good
is,
lesson to learn,
a
right?
good lesson. And from that day forward, everything is test, 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 pilot, 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 then grow and then add services. And why would I add that extra service in? And we've just said yes. And to your point, learn to say no to the things that don't feel right. Keep your business how you feel you want to manage it, and don't grow it because that's just the natural thing to do, the
That's the
natural
thing too, and
progression.
it's so funny because I do think it's a piece of the entrepreneurial conversation that's often overlooked. There's a lot of chatter about grow as big as you can, hit multi seven, which is, again, if that is your drive, that's what you want to do, 1000% go for it. That's incredible. We need
Yeah.
more women at the top, specifically in that echelon of like business and what's happening. But at a certain point too, when you build a business, it kind of becomes the job. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't always necessarily have to be growing. If you hit a space where you're like, this is where I'm at and I love it, it hits all my needs, financially I'm set, like everything is feeling good.
Mm-hmm.
You don't necessarily have to push it harder. And I do think that's something that the mainstream chatter kind of doesn't necessarily tap into a lot of. It's always go hard as you can, bigger, 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 grow, grow, grow. No wonder burnout and stuff happens, because at a certain point you can be like, this is my life, this is my job. Let's do, and it doesn't have to stay plateaued. You could do that for a few years, carry it, and then decide you want to do something else. I've known people who have had multi six-figure business who've scaled down because they were like, this isn't bringing me joy. I would like to earn this much. This hits all my needs. I'm very satisfied. This is the amount of work I want to take on. And that, but in their mind, sometimes that can come off as, oh, but failure. Am I failing? And you're not. It's all about, and this is why I always go back to, what is your creative everyday way of work and life? Because the business you run informs the life you live in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. You can have a very, very successful business, but if it's taking every second of your life, where is the living part? That might need an evaluation. Unless working every second of the day is like, that is your happy place, then go for it. But you have to be so aware of what you want to do, what you want it to look like, and more importantly, what you want it all to feel like. And I think that's something really important to remember before. That's why I love when you're saying like you test, because through each testing phase, I would imagine you're getting information about yourself. You're learning more about you and, oh, I love this. This is feeling weird. Why? And then you can examine that. And now this isn't to say every time you make a change or a move in your business, it's going to, like, even if you do all this, going to feel flawless. It won't. Again, that's just, I think, the nature of entrepreneurship. There will be hiccups and all this kind of stuff. But the whole point of being your own boss is so you can kind of create the kind of life and work life that you want. So create
the freedom that you want.
Yeah.
The freedom. Exactly. It's what freedom. Is it exactly?
Yeah.
Laura, you have been amazing. Thank you so much. I always enjoy talking to you. Where can people find you? Where should we direct them? One spot. Where should they go?
So as much as I've said, I have a love-hate relationship with social media. At Gooseberry Studios is my handle on Instagram.
And that's GOOSE BERRY Studios. Okay.
And then in the link in bio there, you can find my newsletter, which is where I am showing up more and more these days. So either one of those, if you'd like to follow along. And if not, I completely get it.
Okay. Well, listen, you've been wonderful. Thank you so much. And I hope we connect very soon, where I'm in front of the camera, much more storytelling, ready to give my lifestyle integration, and you're behind the camera,
oh my goodness,
recording it all. So
well, thank you for having me. This
love you. Thank you so much.
Sorry, I'm talking over you, but thank you so much. This has been a delight, and I could talk about this stuff all day. So thank you for inviting me on, and as always, such a treat hanging out with you.
Thank you. All right, well, we'll talk soon.
Okay, bye.